Tell your story.
Change the conversation.
Organized by students.
TEDxYouth at SHC.
What do you see? A 5'1" girl? An 11th grader? An athlete? A student who goes to Sacred Heart Cathedral? An American or Chinese? Or just Asian? Identity is complicated, but let me add a few more things. My name is Amy. I like baking, I like eating hot pot, I like creating artwork. But identity is still complicated. Often, when people ask me what my ethnicity is, I have to juggle between two options. Am I Chinese or am I Vietnamese? You see, my parents, they came from Vietnam, but their ancestry is Chinese because their ancestors were Chinese. And yet here in America, we religiously follow Vietnamese culture. At home, we eat Vietnamese food, we celebrate Vietnamese New Year's, and we listen to Vietnamese music. We breathe in Vietnamese. One exception is that my parents do speak Vietnamese, but I don't. I speak Chuzhou, which is an uncommon Chinese dialect. My parents have it figured out. They are Chuzhou people from Vietnam. And for me, I'm still unsure. I have to juggle between either the environment that I've been raised in or my ancestral tie, which not that I have no connection to, but less so than Vietnamese. Already at home, I struggled with identifying who I was, yet the struggle continued in school. When I was in junior high, I was called whitewashed because of my love for Starbucks or Uggs. And now in high school, I've began to appreciate various Asian cultures more. For example, I like the beauty standards, the food, and the entertainment industry in Korea and Japan. And for this, I've been called a Koreaboo or a weeb, which are derogatory terms for people outside the culture that are trying to intertwine themselves within the culture. My interests in both American and Asian culture do constitute my identity, but these labels do not. These labels imply that it is bad for me to assimilate myself to a culture that I am interested in. My point is that your race does not determine your interests. Yet although your race does not determine your interests, your environment does. The distinction between these two are blurred within society. The group that you are born into is not the only part that makes up your identity, because your environment, your interests, and your background do as well. Your interests, as well as your identity, are flexible, and they are up for you to decide. Now the question is it okay to take from other cultures to add to one's identity? So often, I've been labeled as a thief in taking from other people's cultures. But where's the line between appropriating a culture versus appreciating it? And it's true, some people do feel that cultural appropriation is a robbery of who they are, an unjust impersonation, and an invasion of their privacy. So how can people add to their identity by taking from other cultures without covering their own identity and without violating other cultures when different people have different degrees as to what exactly cultural appropriation is? My solution in one word is intention. Keep in mind that intention isn't something you can necessarily tell just by looking at someone. It requires interaction and time to discern someone's true motives. In this way, the manner in which someone approaches a culture and their intentions that they have behind it is a pretty good indicator as to whether or not they are appropriating a culture. And as long as someone isn't appropriating a culture, in this day and age of interdependency and global exchange, cultural synergy should be celebrated. I was able to travel to both Japan and Europe recently, and the experiences, the knowledge, and the customs that I took back with me to America stayed with me and subtly influenced my very lifestyle. I was no longer this caterpillar that was confined to being Chinese, but now this butterfly that was still Chinese, but also radiated a glow of all sorts of cultures. The idea of identity is not solely originated in your place of origin or your race or your ethnicity. It is now a choice. And because it's a choice, this demonstrates our society today. Culture is no longer just a choice, but there's also other things to consider like gender and sexuality, etc. Those are all values that are upheld in the city of San Francisco today. And now, this kind of cultural interchange has always existed. Consider the example of the printing press by Johannes Gutenberg. Did you know he actually combined his invention with the idea of the Chinese? The Chinese contributed because they invented paper and they invented the movable type. And out came this invention that increased literacy, spread knowledge, and provided a means for people to challenge authority. Moreover, a merge in culture does not necessarily mean a loss in old culture. In fact, it is the responsibility of the individual to try to retain their old culture. In fact, certain cities in Japan, like the old Kyoto, have been successful in retaining their old culture. There, I was able to sleep on the floor, bathe in an onsen, and take time away from the city in nature. My point is that retaining traditions while sharing knowledge and practices is still very much possible. Now, I understand that there is value in tradition because of exclusivity, and I am proud to have this sort of key to the Chinese culture that I and the select few have been blessed with just as a gift from birth. And because I have this key to the Chinese culture, despite having the right to define myself by other cultures, I still do have the responsibility to acknowledge and respect my own heritage. And there are other keys out there that I don't have that other people do, seen by the hundreds of other cultures out there. However, I do understand that people do become infuriated by cultural appropriation at times because it does constitute a loss of identity, especially when it's done by someone that comes from a place of ignorance. So to clarify, despite my perception that cultures intertwining has its benefits when it doesn't cross the red line of cultural appropriation, I still very much value sacredness in tradition. So it's taken me a while, about 16 to 17 years to be exact. But I think I finally found my place in the world. And as life unfolds, there are many more experiences that will shape who I am as a person. But despite knowing who I am, who am I to society? My race is Chinese, my culture is Vietnamese, and my clothing is American. Just what am I to you? It doesn't matter because I get to choose my own identity. I get to choose elements from different cultures that make up my interests to decide who I am as a person. For example, I've lived in America for 17 years. I've come home to Vietnamese culture for 17 years, and I've had an ancestral tie to the Chinese, aging since the beginning of time. I'm not denying who I am anymore because I get to define myself. In fact, the logic of society defining any of you doesn't really add up because you know yourself best. And you can do the same by choosing your identity based on your background, your interests, and your experiences as well. Imagine what it would be like if everyone was comfortable in their own skin. Imagine what it would be like if everyone took the best of every culture and made it their own. Imagine a world in which young individuals like myself were able to decide their interests earlier because others weren't judging them for it. What might it be like if you actually had control of your life in a day and age in which everything seems to be moving so fast? Identity is something you truly have a grip of, that you carry even to your grave. Despite the fact that there are a lot of uncontrollable aspects in life, I get to decide who I am. Society doesn't get to do that anymore. And I don't get to decide what each and every single one of you are. Together, we must go through the journey of identifying ourselves more in life. Thank you.